And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Thursday, December 4th, 2025. And the ice is extensive now across the Beaufort Sea coastline down along the Chukchi Sea and into not just Kotzebue but into Norton Sound, and the ice is quickly filling in now south of the Bering Strait off of Wales and Port Clarence and to the north of Savunga. And with the colder temperatures that are on the way coming in off of the mainland, we're going to have some very strong northeasterly winds develop, especially coming in off of the YK deltas in Bristol Bay over the weekend. We can see some winds gusting upwards of 40 to 50 knots with bitterly cold air with wind chills and air temperatures well below zero. So the weather map late this Thursday night and the Friday morning, we have a front that's slowly sagged southward to along the Gulf and approaching the northern panhandle. And as the Arctic air continues to be pushed southwestward, this front will actually come down and then wrap around and pull the cold air across the Alaska Peninsula later tomorrow and certainly into Saturday. We have a collection of lows out over the North Pacific. There's going to be a more notable low lifting into the Western Gulf on Friday. And that is going to send a batch of moisture into the colder air. So as a result, we have winter weather advisories for the Copper River Basin. We have also potential for heavy snowfall, winter storm watches. Northern Panhandle could see over a foot of snow Friday night and Saturday. Interior areas will see increasing northeast winds with blowing snow. Blizzard conditions possible in the Alaska Range and in the higher terrain along the Elliott and Dalton highways to the north and northwest of Fairbanks. But the low out over the Gulf is going to become just a broad circulation with other waves of low pressure that are moist to get wrapped into this circulation later this weekend, early next week. Meanwhile, high pressure up here across the Arctic Ocean, eastern Russia into northwest Canada will continue to build. So here on Saturday, we see the pressure gradient increasing across the mainland. This is going to send some very strong northeasterly winds out of Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays off along the outer Yukon coast. And as you get out here in the open water of the eastern Bering, there will be some very heavy freezing spray as the result of these strong Arctic winds coming in off of the mainland. And the low will just kind of crank up there over the Gulf, another piece of energy rotating up for later in the weekend. So things are shaping up Friday. In the Panhandle, you have north winds as that front sags south there into Lynn Canal. North winds 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Still southeast, northeast winds, kind of a mixed bag coming down through Petersburg, Ketchikan, Metlakatla with waves running 2-3 feet. Outer coast winds are generally west to northwest, 10 to 15 knots outside of Cross Sound down through Prince of Wales Island, and then southwest to southeast winds 10 knots there, Yakutat Bay, and on up toward Cape Suckling. But for Saturday, winds are going to pick up across the region. We have a front that's going to be draped like this. So as a result, you're going to have snow to the north in the northern Panhandle along the Haines and Klondike highways up toward Yakutat and out toward Cordova. And winds are going to be 25 knots southeasterly there at Lynn Canal, 4 or 5 foot waves, 30 knot southeast winds through Stevens Passage, and then south winds to 40 knots, Dixon Entrance with waves 10 to 14 feet, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. For the outer coast, outside of Cross Sound, winds are going to be south to 35 knots, otherwise south-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, Sitka down to on the outer coast there of Prince of Wales Island, and then look for easterly 35 to 40 knot gales out of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling with waves of 13 to 14 feet. For Friday, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots, waves 2-3 feet. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, look for northeast winds 15 to 25 knots, strongest toward Kayak Island. And then we're going to see northeast winds increasing down the length of Cook Inlet. On Friday, 20 to 25 knot northeast winds with waves 6 to 7 feet off of Anchor Point down to Kennedy Entrance. And then winds really crank up Saturday with the low sitting down here in the southwestern Gulf. We have northeast winds of 30 knots within Prince William Sound, and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, waves could be upwards of 10 feet outside of Hinchinbrook toward Kayak Island, but winds really increase down the length of Cook Inlet, look for north-northeast winds of 35 to 40 knot gales with waves of 10 to 12 feet. And then around Kodiak Island for Friday, northeast winds 20 knot, Shelikof Strait, northwest winds east side of Kodiak Island off of Akiak and east of Chiknik. As we go down the peninsula, winds are going to turn from north out of Bristol Bay at 25 knots to northeasterly at around 20 knots. And then for Saturday, the winds really kick in because we have the low cranked up here over the western Gulf. So the counterclockwise circulation has northerly 35 knot gales within Shelikof Strait, but the winds really take shape, 35 to 40 knot northerly winds along the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula with waves building 10 to 16 feet there on Saturday. Likely also have some snow squalls as that Arctic air crosses the southeast corner of the Bering and files through the gaps here within the Alaska Peninsula where there could be locally higher gusts through those gaps. And then Friday, relatively quiet for the eastern and central Aleutians, variable winds around 10 knots. The front to the west weekends, we have west winds 25 to 30 knots, Kiska to Shimia. But then on Saturday, the eastern Aleutians are kind of on the edge of that stronger gale force winds, north winds to 35 knots at Unalaska, falling off north-northeast 30 knots, Nikolsky through Atka and Adak. And then once you get west of Adak, look for easterly winds 25 to 30 knots on Saturday. Now you're really going to see the winds crank here coming in off of the mainland. As I told you, the pressure gradient really increases by Saturday across the interior. And this is going to set up a very strong northeast winds with very cold air, sub-zero air temperatures, wind chills, dangerously cold, at least 30 below or so, or colder as we get into the weekend. But northeast winds 25 knots Friday out of Bristol Bay, north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay at 25 knots or so, and coming down along Norton Sound, the lower Yukon coast, look for northeast winds around 20 knots. Northeast winds to 25 knots around St. Paul, St. George. But come Saturday, as you have the low down over here in the Gulf, northeast to north winds are really going to crank up. 35 knot northerly gales out of Bristol Bay and through the Pribilofs, waves building at 15 feet around the Pribilofs. Look at this, outside, these winds coming down the Kuskokwim River Valley, Kuskokwim Bay, north winds to 50 knots, offshore flow, very cold, wind chills at least 30 below. And then here along the Arctic coast, along the Yukon coast, we're looking at northeast to north winds around 30 knots with that ice that's in place there. And then as we go up through the Bering Strait Friday, winds will be northeast around 15 knots through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. A lot of ice, though, is filled in. And as we go up along the coastline, either northeast winds 15 knots, becoming more northerly. Utqiagvik through Prudhoe Bay at 10 knots before turning westerly at Kaktovik at 15 knots on Friday. And then Saturday, winds will be out of the west-northwest at around 10 to 15 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast, turning easterly as you get past Utqiagvik through Wainwright, Point Lay, and Cape Lisburne, 15 to 20 knots. Then look for northeast winds of 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea. But then once you get past the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the northeast at 20 knots from Wales and Port Clarence to Savunga and Gamble on Saturday.